changes in IFRS 15 in the new revenue standard compared to the old one is that IFRS 15 requires you to break down the revenue transaction before you're thinking about recognizing or even measuring this transaction. And it gives very specific guidance in the standard. It says you should do this using a 5-step process. So let's now go and have a look at this 5-step process. Right, so the standard recognizes that you as the company, when you want to make revenue, you want to sell to a customer. So in order for a revenue transaction to happen, there has to be a customer. But the standard goes a little bit further. It says that there has to be a contract with a customer. So the very first provision is you need to have a contract with a customer. This contract can be written, it can be oral. For example, when a company places certain products on a shelf, they are making an offer to sell. When the customer goes into a store, picks the product off the shelf and goes to the till to go and pay, they are then accepting this offer that the company is making, and they are then agreeing to buy this product. So even though there's no formal written agreement that's signed by both parties, this is seen to be a contract with a customer, and this is the very first thing that we need to identify, that we have a contract with a customer. The next thing that we want to then look at is what is it that the company is offering to the customer. So what is the company giving the customer as part of this agreement? Is the company giving the customer some goods? Is it giving the customer some services? Is it giving the customer goods and services? Whatever the case might be, the next thing we do is we identify what the company gives to the customer, and this in accounting jargon in IFRS 15 is called performance obligations. So what are the performance obligations of the company? What have they agreed in terms of the contract to give to the customer? Now, also in the contract, the customer will, in exchange, agree to give something to the company, usually money. It's usually cash. So the next thing we're identifying is, in terms of this agreement between the company and the customer, what has the customer agreed to give to the company? Normally cash, it could be some other things, it could be shares, it could be other goods in exchange, whatever the case might be. Now we're identifying, in exchange for what the customer is receiving from the company, what is it going to give to the company? Then the next step is then to allocate what the customer is going to give to the company. So whatever the customer is giving to the company, to allocate that cash or whatever the case might be to what the company is going to give the customer. So for example, if the company is giving the customer goods plus a service, then the customer is paying cash. Now we need to allocate that cash. A portion of it will go to the goods, a portion of it will go to the service, and the total will be the total cash that is expected to be received by the company from the customer. So now what we need to do in step 4 is allocate then the transaction price, so what the customer is paying, to the performance obligations, what the company is giving to the customer. And then the very last step that is identified in IFRS 15 is now we're going to be able to then recognize revenue. We'll recognize revenue when the company has done what it said it will to the customer. So when the company has given what it said it will in the contract to the customer, that's when we're going to recognize revenue. So here you can see that step 5 can only happen once step 2 is completed. If the company has agreed to give goods to the customer, you can only recognize the revenue once the goods have been delivered to the customer. If the company has agreed to give a service to the customer, you can only recognize the revenue once that service has been performed for the customer. All right, so step 5 depends on step 2, the performance obligations. Let's now look at all of these pictures in words and see what these steps are. So the first step is we identify the contract with the customer. The second step is we identify the performance obligation. So this is looking at what the company is going to give to the customer. All right. The third step is to determine the transaction price. Now we're looking at it the other way. We're looking at, in exchange, what is the customer going to give to the company? And then in the fourth step, we're going to allocate step 3 to step 2. And in the last step, what we're going to do is, if we've performed in step 2, if the company has delivered in terms of its performance obligations, then we're going to be able to recognize the revenue in the financial statements or in the books of the company. That is the very basic concepts or the very core concepts in IFRS 15. So it's not really complicated. It's quite easy and simple to understand, and it's logical and it makes sense. Now, what we're going to be doing for the rest of this learning unit is we're going to be going into each of these steps in a little bit more detail and looking at the funnies that you can possibly encounter when you're going through all of these steps. This is going to help you then answer any test question or exam question appropriately and be able to earn the maximum amount of marks. But remember, always try to understand the concepts. Don't swat these steps, but rather try to understand what these steps are saying and how you can then apply these steps whenever you get a test question or an exam question.